So welcome. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Kelsey Erickson Stroifert. I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer for the Texas Restaurant Association and one of the crazy people who came together to launch the Employers for Childcare Task Force. Today, we are going to do a little bit of a quick briefing on who we are, how we got here, and really most importantly, what we are proposing to Texas legislators that we believe will advance our mission of expanding access to affordable, quality childcare for working parents in Texas to really shore up our economy, our families, and our workforce. So with that, let me dive in really quickly to some welcome and housekeeping. We are recording this and we will make it available to members of the media afterwards. So if you need a copy of the recording or you want to follow up with an interview request or anything like that, please just send a note to our PR firm. You can see their email on the screen, and they are here with us running tech in the background as well. So thank you, ECPR. And then at the end, we are going to reserve 15-20 minutes or so for questions from the media as well. So for those of us tuning in from the media, please just hold on to those questions and we'll get to them at the end. All right, Wendy, you're up. Actually, Wendy, before we turn to you, let's turn it over to Emily really fast for a quick welcome and kind of reminder of why we got so invested in this work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelsey. And thank you all of you for attending today. I think as the president and CEO of the Texas Restaurant Association, I can just tell you that I think this is a historic day and a day that I'm incredibly proud, because what you really have happened is a lot of business organizations with incredible advocates have come together to sort of put a stake in the ground on the importance of, as Kelsey just said, affordable but also safe childcare. And with 1.4 million employees, the largest private sector employer in the state, this is a significant issue for us. So it's a significant issue for the overall economy and for the families and the communities in which we all live. And so I'm really very, very fortunate to work with Kelsey and this group and to see their leadership on this issue. And I have no doubt that we'll make, I think, hopefully good inroads this 89th session at the legislature.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. All right, Wendy, take us away.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Wendy Eptain. I'm the Executive Director for Early Matters. You can see this up on the screen. I'll give a little bit of color commentary here about our Employers for Childcare Task Force, but we're made up of nearly 70 businesses, local chambers, associations from all across the state. We represent a number of industries: finance, hospitality, oil and gas, healthcare, and more. And, really the idea behind E4C was formed after the last legislative session. We heard from business leaders in our networks that they really wanted a more active role in thinking through solutions for improving access to childcare. And you might be thinking, but why? Why were there a bunch of businesses that wanted to get involved in childcare? And why did they think that that had anything to do with them? And they're sort of twofold. One is that we've just really seen employee needs become more pronounced post-COVID, and businesses have had to evolve both their benefits and also workplace expectations to really match what working families are looking for. So we know that most families now are in dual working households. Work-life balance has become a priority for those who are in the workplace. And employers are having they have to be competitive when they're thinking about recruiting and retaining top talent. We've got about 60% of non-working parents saying that childcare is their top reason for why they're not working. And our incoming Gen Z workers, about 30% of them are rating childcare benefits even above healthcare and health insurance. And so it's becoming an issue for employers as they are thinking about their employees and retention. The other thing I'll just mention is that it's obviously critical for every working family, but it definitely hits some industries harder than others. Industries like healthcare, construction, retail, manufacturing, hospitality, these are known as deskless workers, which is maybe intuitive, but it means they're typically required to be present in person. So they can't really do remote work. And that also includes a larger proportion of lower paid workers. And along with that, there's sort of this special caveat within that many are needing non-traditional hour care. So childcare centers might be open from 8 to 4, 8 to 5, but a number of these industries actually require people to be in person after 5 p.m. So all of that said, We keep hearing about this, obviously, from the restaurant industry. That's why TRA is involved, but others of us, Texas Association of Business and Early Matters, the businesses that are engaged with this across the state. And so as a result, we decided to launch the Employers for Childcare Task Force in January of this year. So we spent the first 4 to 5 months hearing and bringing in external experts to share with our task force, talk about childcare, tell us about the complexities and the challenges of the system. And then we've been spending the last probably 2 to 3 months now discussing potential policy solutions. I'll just say before I pass it over to Kelsey to talk about our policy ideas, but there's a pretty clear understanding, I think, that that this is, in order to address this as a systemic problem, that it's got to be a combination of employers, government, and families working together.
Completely agree with that, Wendy. So really quickly, working together as a task force, we held lots of meetings, as Wendy said. We established various principles, and then we established these 5 focus areas for the 89th legislative session. I'm not going to read through them all, but I think it really illustrates that we wanted to look at this industry, the childcare industry, from a systemic perspective, both looking for those short-term, immediate wins we could get this session, and also how we set ourselves up for a much more sustainable childcare infrastructure moving forward. So with all that said, let's dive into our blueprint for Texas's 89th legislative session, which essentially is our suggested agenda to lawmakers, regardless of their politics or their which party they are a member of. We really think that these are items we can tackle this legislative session to make gains for workers, for families, for businesses, and for our economy as a whole. So first and foremost is a big one, and it's number 1 for a reason, and that's because we're the Employers for Childcare Task Force. So initially, we think it's really important for the legislature to pass a bill this session addressing employer partnerships and really helping employers do more for their own employees. And our concept with this bill is really to have somewhat of an omnibus bill, which can be a dirty word at the Texas Capitol, but it's very intentional because we think there are lots of different mechanisms the Texas legislature could use to advance us in this space. And all of these things would be significant wins for the state. So rather than pick sort of one mechanism and putting all of our eggs in that basket, we wanted to present lawmakers with sort of a menu of options, to use restaurant terminology, a menu of options that they can cobble together to advance this goal of making it easier for employers of all sizes to innovate and address their employees' childcare needs. So what are we putting in this initial bill? Well, one, and this is exciting because it's really a no-cost item for the state, we really want the state to, I'm going to say invest, but I don't necessarily mean with money, but make it a priority to have information, resources, best practices, toolkits, examples, any and all information that employers could use to access childcare for their employees. We want that to be in one place, probably on the Texas Workforce Commission's website, just to make it really easy for businesses of all size to find this kinds of information and best practices. Speaking on behalf of restaurants, I hear from operators all the time that they want to do more in this space, but they have no idea where to start. They're experts in running restaurants. They are not experts in running childcare facilities. And so just providing information and best practices and ideas is going to be a really great start to help them. One very specific example of that, there are federal programs right now where employers can set up tax-free savings accounts. Think of it like a health savings account, for example, to help their employees access childcare. I talk to employers all the time that have no idea that that even exists, much less how to go about setting it up. So that's just one very specific example. I think there's lots of others of how sharing information and best practices can go a really long way. It's also something we can build on in future years, which I think is really important. Another piece of this one bill that we're looking at is called a Childcare Innovation Pilot Program. This is a concept that comes out of Tarrant County and our friends at Childcare Associates. They took some of their COVID federal dollars and invested in a similar pilot at a local level. And basically the idea was, rather than reinvent the wheel, let's try to find existing high quality childcare providers. Let's match them with specific local workforce needs. So for example, hey, we know that in this area of our community, there is not nearly enough non-traditional hours care or enough infant care or enough home-based care, right? You can come up with lots of different specifics. But the idea is, let's find those gaps and let's match existing high-quality providers. Let's give them a little bit of money and help them meet that need. That program has seen tremendous results in Tarrant County, and so we think it's really ripe for a state-level pilot program. And so the way that this would work is there would be 2 stages of a competitive grant-making process. The first would start with the different local workforce boards across Texas applying to the Texas Workforce Commission and saying, we want to be a part of this program. Then, depending on how much funding is allocated, the Workforce Commission will pick anywhere from 3, 6, 7 of those regions, making sure that they're diverse. You know, we need urban, suburban, rural, all the above. And then those selected workforce boards would also issue a competitive grant process for high quality childcare providers to apply for the funding, demonstrate how they can meet the local workforce need. The really exciting piece about this part of the bill is that it directly addresses supply, right? We talk a lot about how to make childcare more affordable, more safe, more high quality. Those things are great, but if you literally cannot find a place to put your child because there are wait lists everywhere that you turn, it's hard to appreciate quality and affordability, et cetera, if you literally have no access to the system in the first place. So we're really excited about that opportunity to invest in supply in a way that is very targeted and deliberate in terms of what is the local workforce need. Lastly, in this one bill idea, is this idea of a state matching program and franchise tax credits. So the basic concept of the bill is something we've looked at from Michigan, from Kentucky. It's sometimes called a tri-state or a tri-share model. But the basic idea is, if an employer can put up some funding to help one of their employees access childcare, then the state will match that employer contribution, helping that employee ultimately afford childcare. And it would still be up to the employee, importantly, where they want to spend those dollars, right? So it would have to be an accredited program with the state, a regulated program by the state. But otherwise, the family would have sole choice over where they actually are investing and sending their children, which we think is really important. The other piece of that, because we hear from restaurants, small businesses, lots of other industries that run on very narrow profit margins, they tell us that's a great idea, but I don't know that I can afford to put up a few $100s for employees who need access to this program. I want to help them access the money, but I don't know that I can make that fit in my bottom line right now, in my P&L right now. That's where the franchise tax credit piece comes in. So the idea there is that the state will essentially give the business credit on their franchise tax payments for the investment that that business is making in their employees' childcare. Importantly, we want to make sure that that is broad in the sense that, you know, this program is going to look different for different employers. Some employers are going to do on-site childcare. That's great. I don't think a lot of restaurants are going to be able to provide on-site childcare, and a lot of other industries. So we want to make sure that we make that flexible and that we're not sort of picking winners and losers within different types of industries and different size employers. So that was a lot, but there's a lot of meat on this one. So I wanted to get into a little bit of the details. Our second recommendation is to require the Texas Workforce Commission and the Health and Human Services Commission to collaborate on a process that will streamline childcare regulations with these 3 goals in mind. 1, we want to lower childcare providers' insurance costs. We're hearing from private childcare providers that the number of companies offering liability insurance is dramatically shrinking. We've heard it's as low as 2 now across the entire state. And then if you can find a company to write your insurance policy, those premiums are skyrocketing, which of course impacts what the tuition rates that provider has to charge and whether families can actually afford to send their children to that provider. We know regulations have a piece of sort of what insurance liability costs and the risks and liabilities and that sort of thing. So we want those two topics to be sort of looked at as interrelated, because they are. The second piece of this is, of course, we need regulations that protect health, safety, and quality. We've always said that E4C is not the safety experts. We're not the quality education experts. But we know, and we hear regularly from providers, that the regulatory landscape right now could be dramatically improved. It's not necessarily about having more or fewer regulations. It's about having the right set of regulations. And then third on this list, making sure that they are consistently and reasonably enforced. Part of this is that you have different agencies overseeing different parts of childcare, but part of it is just that the government is big and gets busy, and it's really time to bring these agencies together, have them collaborate, have the experts really look at, okay, what are the regulations we truly need that are going to do the job without raising costs? Third is we want to improve cross-agency childcare data sharing and reporting so the state can better understand opportunities and outcomes. Again, this ties into the fact that we have different agencies overseeing different parts of the childcare regime in Texas. We've got to make sure that they are sharing data, they're collecting data that talks to each other, they're not using terminology differently, and that lawmakers and advocates can really see the entire data landscape and then make decisions based on that data. So this is one of those wins we can achieve this session that really will pave the way for a more sustainable system moving forward. So those are our top 3 priorities that E4C plans to really take the lead on. We also have 3 additional priorities that are things that we've identified as being very within our focus areas and our goals and objectives and who we are. But we also know that other people and other groups are playing a leadership role on these topics as well, which is great. So the fourth one here is really what we call a defensive objective, and that is to maintain the existing sunset scheduling dates for the Texas Workforce Commission and the Health and Human Services Commission. Again, these agencies oversee different parts of childcare. So we think it's really important not only that they go through the sunset review process, but that they do that at the same time and soon so that we can build this more sustainable structure moving forward. So no bills need to pass to make this happen. We simply need to make sure that their sunset scheduling dates aren't moved backwards. Number 5 is strengthen the workforce behind the workforce by creating a new priority category for our state's childcare subsidy system. This priority category would be specifically for childcare teachers and their children. There's no cost to it because this is an existing program that's already funded, but unfortunately it's underfunded, and so often people are on a wait list for months or years. All we're saying here is that let's prioritize childcare teachers within that waiting list so that we don't lose an existing childcare teacher because she or he cannot afford to have their own kids in childcare, even though they're eligible for this subsidy. So it's something that directly helps childcare workers and indirectly helps everyone else, because if you can keep those teachers in the classroom, then that means more capacity to serve everyone else. Importantly, there are already existing priority categories in the subsidy system. This new priority category would not jump ahead of any of those. It would essentially be the next one in the list. And so we don't think that anyone sort of loses their spot in line, for lack of a better word, because of this program. And then last but not least, we want to remove local regulatory barriers that increase cost for home-based childcare providers. These providers are already required to get a license or some kind of registration from the state. They're extensively regulated by the state when it comes to health, safety, et cetera. And so what we don't need is a patchwork of different local regulations added on top of them. Think about things like fire marshal rules, zoning. There's all kinds of things that locally come into play when you're talking about a locally regulated business that don't necessarily make sense for childcare, which is a very specialized business that is already extensively regulated by the state. And again, other groups are leading that charge, but this is something that we feel very strongly about as well. And so we want to help get that over the finish line. And again, no cost to the state, which is great. So here's kind of a synopsis of all 6. Again, the first 3 are the ones that we're really going to take the lead on. The second 3 are ones that we're going to very proactively support, but we know other groups are advancing as well. And we are very excited to move forward with that agenda. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I think we are going to turn it over to Kyle. Kyle, if you're still listening, turn your video back on for me. Kyle and his family operate George's Restaurants in Waco. He was an early member of the Employers for Childcare Task Force. He's a father himself and a business owner. And so he really knows how the lack of affordable quality childcare impacts not only his family, but also his business as well. So as soon as I figure out the technology to turn.
Can you hear me? I can hear you. I can hear you. I just can't see.
Okay, we can hear you, Kyle. So go ahead and start talking and I'll figure out how to turn your video back on.
No problem. Thank you, Kelsey. Hello again. My name's Kyle Citrano. I have 3 restaurants in Waco, Texas. We employ around 500 staff members across those 3 restaurants. Like she said, here's my video. Let me start my video. There we are. Hi, thank you. But I'm also a father of 3. My kids are my world. And I'm so thankful that I have a stay-at-home wife that has a master's in early childhood education that can help raise our family. But I also know that not all of my staff members have that available to them at home. Sometimes with 500 employees, you joked about running daycares, but sometimes with that many employees, you do feel like you have a giant daycare. It's just older kids with the same issues. And so it's always an adventure here, that's for sure. All jokes aside, my employees, they are my kids. I spend more time with them probably than my own family. And no matter what, I always want what's best for them. And that's why I think childcare reform is so important. You talk with your staff daily. You see the problems that they have with their own childcare, and you have these conversations, and you realize how it's important. But I think the biggest effect that you see is your staff shortages on a daily basis. I would say the number one thing you have is call-ins, and that's due to childcare. If you go into a restaurant today, even 3 years from COVID restrictions, you still have staff shortages as a major problem. You walk into a restaurant, there may not be full sections open. They may just not be able to hire enough people. But a lot of the times it has to do with those call-ins. And I can tell you as a restaurant owner, and having gone through COVID and having had days where you've been limited on staff, there's nothing worse than having to limit capacity due to that shortage. It looks bad on you, it looks bad for your staff, and it has such negative outcomes. And if you choose not to limit your capacity and you roll with what you have, your service can struggle. And if you can't provide the same level of service with one server taking on double the amount of tables, it could really cause a future decline in that return business. And we need all we can get. We can't afford to lose business, and we can't afford to suffer for down the road for trying to cover up on those days. So it makes you as a business owner have to make some really difficult decisions. At the end of the day, that staff member not coming in, it may not cost us in labor dollars that day, but it could cost you in the future no matter what. We employ lots of working moms. I always say that's one of my favorite things to hire, because it's somebody that's they're working to feed a mouth. They're working hard to do everything they can to provide for their families. They're going to come in and give you their best. And that's what I love about hiring moms. Moms and fathers. There's lots of single dads out there too. But we do employ a lot of single parents, and whether it's with a single income or if it's more traditional income, traditional family with mom working as well as dad to provide those 2 streams of income. Our largest call out is because of this childcare. If there's a sick kid, mom's staying home. They've got to stay back, and they don't have that. They don't have that ability, and that's one thing. Even if you have a sick kid, you can't worry so much about that. But if you're sick, if you have one caretaker, say it's a grandma, say it's a babysitter, they call in, you don't have anybody to watch your kids, so you've got to miss that work day. Um, it's really difficult. And if you can't be at work, you can't provide for your family. Um, you know, we talk about you know, childcare can be so unaffordable, can be so expensive. And whether you're coming into work that day and you're working a lunch shift, you're working a dinner shift. Sometimes you're having people that are just trying to figure out, is it worth it for me to go to school, to go to work that day, because I've got to go and pay for this. And that's, you hate that for anybody. If my staff member is forced to miss work, and it begins this chain reaction, they miss work, they miss that day. Those repercussions go on from just that one day. You're talking about employees that live paycheck to paycheck. They can't miss work. If they do, they miss a rent payment, they miss a car payment. And then you start diving into that day-to-day finance that just to help them provide for their family. And it's really difficult to see as their employer, trying to help them. You try to have some leniency, you try to have some understanding, and try to help out as best you can. And some days they've got to call in, and you feel bad. You know that they need that money, and some days it's not just one, it's two, it's this, and they have no way of getting around it, because they are having to depend on somebody who's not a traditional child care taker. Um, Working mothers, they appreciate flexible scheduling. They appreciate the high hourly pay and the ability to make cash that comes in our industry. And that flexibility, though, it has challenges. And that biggest challenge, I think, is being available for the best shifts. I can tell you in our business, and I think you could see it in any way, but working a Monday lunch shift versus a Friday night is a big difference in the available money they can capture. We're open breakfast, lunch, and dinner at two of our locations Monday through Saturday. And even though breakfast and lunch are busy times, and you can make very good money, working a Friday night in a busy area with alcohol sales and all that can provide a lot more money for tips. And so it's difficult, though, because a traditional childcare may be able to help with that daytime service, but nighttime service is a whole different challenge. Finding consistent babysitters or family to help watch your children can be subject to the same call-in issues we experience in the mornings. You lose your sitter, you lose your shift, you lose your money. Developing childcare for non-traditional hours would tremendously help mothers in hospitality, not to mention healthcare and other industries that have non-traditional hours worked. When we've talked about these things we talked about, there's so many industries that have those late night hours. You talk about first responders, you talk about a lot of those things. We're not the only ones that see this happening. By providing quality childcare in the evening, servers would have the opportunity to generate more revenue for themselves. And most importantly, restaurants would be able to better utilize their staff by opening up their availabilities. It would bring more staff to our industry, while at the same time better taking advantage of the staff we already have by not limiting their availability so much. You want people to work their 40 hours a week. You don't want them to have to cut it to 20 or 25 just because of what they have available for childcare. You'd love for them. It's a lot easier to give that person more hours that you already have working for you than to go find somebody else to replace them. And I think the hardest part about a lot of this is that these people want to work. We always talk about it's hard to find people that want to work or are willing to work, but these people are willing and wanting to work in our industry. But that high cost and availability of quality childcare, they're having to look to other industries, other revenue generators for work, besides us, and that's difficult. We're the largest single employer in the state, private employer in the state, and we want to continue to bring people onto our restaurants and work. There's great money to be made for them. They just need the time and ability to work, and that starts with that childcare. Um, she talked about, Kelsey talked about us fronting the cost or spending the money, but even though we have three restaurants and we're busy and we're profitable, our margins are razor thin. We work hard to provide for our staff. We give as much as we can. Over the years, we currently give health care to our staff if they work the eligible hours. And that's what hurts. If you don't work enough hours, you can't even be eligible for the health care. But we've done 401ks in the plans in the past. We've done education benefits as far as that. But talking about supplementing for childcare, it's just another thing that seems great in theory, but to provide for it is a lot to ask for. Rising costs are hitting restaurants harder than ever. I just got out of an insurance meeting, and to see how expensive insurance is going to be is that. And if we had a daycare, I can't imagine what that insurance would be for us as well. So, but you look at food, labor, you look at credit card swipe fees, insurance, utilities. Those are just a few things that come to mind. But when you like to invest in providing for childcare, the dollars are just not there. We need help for ourselves, for our restaurants to provide for more staff, and our working families need help. And so I'm really hopeful that this legislature will adopt the E4C suggestions to make reforms a real difference for our communities. It really could be helpful, and I'm just appreciative to be on the task force and to work with Kelsey and our staff with TRA, because they've been so wonderful in understanding that this is a big deal for everybody, and not just our industry, but so many others out there. So I hope that we get the help that we're looking for, and most importantly for my staff, I just want to see them be able to prosper.
Thank you, Kyle. So great to hear from you as always. And a couple things you said jumped out at me. One, it's this idea of, people want to work, they want to grow in their careers, they want to provide for their families, but childcare costs are such that they can't afford to work, right? That's really the economic crisis that we're seeing right now. And then also, I just think you're such a great example of employers want to do more in this space. It's not an issue of forcing or dragging or trying to cajole anyone into wanting to address this, but you need a better climate in order to do that, right? Whether that's tax credits, resources, grants, the list goes on and on. There's lots of different ways we can tackle it, but we've got to get you that assistance, and we've got to get government out of the way in some instances, and then we got to get government in the right places to really help make that possible. So thank you,
Absolutely.
Kyle.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to turn it over to Charles Miller with Texas 2036.
Well, just wanted to talk about some of the priorities we're working on. Kelsey has really done a great job of laying out the broader coalition efforts. But I wanted to talk a little bit about data and some of the struggles that we have. So Texas 2036 is a nonprofit public policy organization that's founded on data and evidence, is really driving the support for our policies. And when we started looking into the childcare issue, what we found were we didn't really have the data available to answer some of the most pressing questions we had. We've heard a lot of anecdotes, and we've heard lots of experiences of individuals that are having difficulties finding childcare, affording childcare. But when we try to figure out exactly where those are with the evidence and data to develop policies to support that, we encounter challenges. And so that's why we're excited to really look at supporting this early childhood integrated data system that's going to allow a lot more data sharing between agencies. A lot of our state agencies that are regulating and involved in this childcare space are collecting data individually, and that data doesn't work together to allow us to answer some of the questions that we really need to have those answers to, such as where are currently available spots within the childcare space? How much do those spots cost? Geographically, where are our deserts where we're not able to find that care? We're also lacking information about the priorities of parents in some cases. We know anecdotally that there are parents who are struggling to find care because it's not available in offhand hours. We also know that there are parents who are struggling to find the type of care that they find suitable that meets their educational needs. But we don't have good data on where those priorities lie overwhelmingly. So as we're looking at our long-term goals and how we want to solve this issue long-term, we're really excited about the data foundation that will allow us to, not just this session, but in sessions to go forward, really have more comprehensive solutions. And part and parcel of this is taking a look at this governance structure that we have. I touched on the fact that we have a lot of different agencies that are collecting data, and there's also a number of agencies that each have a piece of the regulatory puzzle. And there's a lack of coordination among those agencies, both at the state level with our local workforce development boards, and then also at the local level as well. Having a single quarterback to drive and coordinate that policy can really be helpful in making sure that there is a single entity who has responsibility for this as a whole. And that provides a single touch point for businesses who are struggling with identifying the solution to some of these issues and getting resolutions and getting answers when there are inconsistencies that do arise, as we've heard time and time again. So those are a couple of the priorities that we're really excited to put our energy behind and are just eager to support this issue that we know is a problem for Texans around the state, both from a business standpoint and from a family standpoint, and making sure that we continue to drive our Texas workforce.
Perfect. Thanks, Charles. Next, we've got Megan Morrow with the Texas Association of Business. You're on mute, Megan.
Dang, amateur move there. Thank you, Kelsey. And thank you to all of our partners on this call. The Restaurant Association to commit to partnership in Texas 2036. So the Texas Association of Business is the state chamber of commerce for Texas. We work with over 150 local chambers across the state, but we also work with over 1,500 businesses across the state, small, medium, and large, and across every industry. And when I do have to say is when we convene our members to talk about policy initiatives and what we can work on to maintain Texas, the Texas economic competitive edge with economic development and workforce, childcare is the top issue that comes up. So we're grateful to be a participant in this coalition, and this is a very important issue. And I think that the policy priorities that Kelsey expertly reviewed are very critical to putting those pieces, the puzzle pieces in place to maintain our competitive edge. And so thanks for everything that our partners are doing on this call, and we're happy to be supportive however we can. And thank you, Kyle, as well, for sharing from your perspective. Your personal experience, that's important too, especially important at the Capitol with legislators.
Thank you, Megan. So if all of our panelists will turn their video back on so everyone can see us. And then now we're just going to open it up to our friends from the media. If y'all have got any questions, raise your hand or drop a note in the chat, and we can unmute you and let you ask away. While we're waiting for that, I'll also note that we've got a document with all of these priorities laid out. We will send the link with that information to everyone right after this call. Lena, I see your hand is raised. I think I have allowed you to talk. Yeah, go shoot.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Hi, yes, this is Lena Ruiz from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I'm in North Texas. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the fourth policy recommendation regarding the sunset schedule. I'm not familiar really with what that is and how that relates to, the Texas Workforce Commission and the HHSC. Can you just talk more about that and why it's a priority?
Absolutely. And thank you for the question, because while I was talking, I was like, this is kind of legislative insider speak. So thank you for asking the question. So the sunset review process is something that Texas does with all of our state agencies. The idea is that every, let's say 6 to 10 to 12 years or so, it kind of varies, but on a periodic basis, every state agency goes through the sunset review process, and it's sort of like a performance audit. So there's a professional staff that comes in, they look at everything that an agency does. They look at things like, does this agency have the statutory authority to do what they're doing? If so, is that a need that we still have in Texas? Is that something that we should continue to do? And if so, is this agency doing it as well as we could be doing it, as efficiently as we could be doing it? So it's sort of an operations audit, for lack of a better word. And Texas Workforce Commission and HHSC are two of the agencies that are currently scheduled for this next review cycle, meaning if their current schedule stays in place, then as soon as this current legislative session ends, they will start that process. So the sunset staff will come in, they'll look at everything these agencies are doing, they'll write a report with their findings. Then there's a panel of lawmakers from the House and the Senate and 2 public members called the Sunset Commission. They'll review that report, they'll make modifications, they'll make additions. All those findings will then go to the full Texas Legislature, in the following session. So this would be the 90th legislative session. And most importantly, the legislature decides at that point, do we continue this agency or not? I think both of these agencies are very likely to be continued, but how is really the question. And so it's really a chance for those of us who care about childcare to take a deep dive in how are these agencies regulating childcare? What role do they play? Is that the appropriate role? And how could it be improved upon? Charles, Wendy, anything to add on that?
No, great explanation.
Any other questions? Just raise your hand. Okay, Tracy, I'm gonna ask you to come off mute and you can ask your question.
Thanks. I'm curious about the efforts that you have made already in the legislature. For example, have you ID'd potential champions in the legislature who are already familiar with childcare, with some of the struggles that businesses are having?
Yes, it is an ongoing process, is what I would say. So we have some potential champions in mind. Don't want to say too much before things are confirmed. But we are very busy meeting with lawmakers at the Capitol. And we're excited about really the bipartisan interest that we're seeing in this topic. So we are, I would say, cautiously optimistic. We're going to have a good reception. The other thing is when I say we, the Employers for Childcare Task Force were invited witnesses in the House interim hearing on childcare. And tomorrow we'll be invited witnesses in the Senate's interim hearing on childcare. So that's another great opportunity for us to really talk one-on-one to lawmakers about what the problems are and what we think are the best solutions.
I would add to that, Kelsey. So yes, in addition to the fact that we have E4C representing and being invited testimony, the fact that we have childcare as an interim charge for both sides is huge. I don't think it's ever been on the table for the Senate in particular. So that only happens if the lieutenant governor decides that, and if members of the Senate have asked for it, and then Lieutenant Governor got letters requesting it. So that is a good signal on that side of it. And the other thing I'll mention is you all may have seen that Speaker Phelan put out several work groups that were gonna be for members specifically, and the House has a work group on childcare. And I believe they met today. I don't know, it's public which members are on that necessarily, but that is also a good sign. And I know it's from what I've heard, it's a bipartisan group of both Republicans and Democrats who are really passionate about this. So all of those things are giving us hope for the coming session, in addition to what Kelsey was saying about us cultivating champions. We've got a few people who've shown interest in being bill authors. So we're excited about that.
Charles, Megan, anything we left out on that? Okay, Karen, I think you had your hand up, but I don't see it right now. So raise your hand again if you have a question. And then in the meantime, I'm gonna go to Carrie. Okay, there you go, Carrie, unmute.
Hi, this is Carrie Heath with the Austin American Statesman. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit on how some of these priorities and how some of these goals could help enhance and increase the number of childcare providers in the field. I know that's been a really big issue, especially over the last couple of years, and how they could clear some of the barriers for encouraging more businesses to enter the childcare field itself.
Wendy, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts. I think there is the idea of adding more childcare itself, which I will just sort of add. We're excited that TWC has a few different programs right now that they're actually, I think it's still an RFP process, where they have been actually looking for a vendor to work directly with businesses to help businesses understand what their employees' childcare needs are, and then make recommendations on what that business could do. So that could entail creating on-site childcare. So getting to that question of expansion, it could mean partnering with a provider down the street. It could mean, you know, thinking about FSAs or a number of other benefits that the employer might be able to offer to their employees. So I think to the question of expanding, yes, it's expanding childcare options, but a lot of times it's thinking about what currently exists and strengthening what currently exists. So along with that, one of the biggest challenges we hear regularly across the state is that you might have a quality childcare provider, but they have closed classroom. They have empty classrooms. And they have empty classrooms because they don't actually have a teacher in the classroom. That gets to a whole complex thing around compensation and the fact that most childcare workers are making between $11 and $13 an hour across Texas. When you could go work at Buc-ee's or Tim Hortons and make $15 to $20 an hour, HEB with benefits. So the competition is pretty fierce out there, I would say, for getting those childcare workers. That gets at one of the asks that we have that Kelsey talked about around the innovation pilot and trying to expand supply. So that grant program, like Kelsey explained, would actually it'd be a competitive grant process for existing providers who are looking to expand their offerings, if you will, to in response to what their employers' needs are. So for example, if you are a provider, you do a landscape scan, you see that you actually have a number of restaurants, I'll use that for an example, right, who need non-traditional care. So they actually need care from 5 to 10 o'clock at night. That provider could apply for the grant and say, well, currently I'm only open until 5 or 6, but I'm going to expand my offering. I'm going to be able to hire new people, use my grant to hire new staff, pay them a little bit more, a bigger of a wage, because that's allowable under this, how we've written it so far. And I'm going to be able to offer more childcare to the people who really need it so that they can go get to work.
Yeah, Kels, can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm going to add, I think this is really important. Something I've learned, and I would say this very humbly, is that when we first started out and realized there was this incredible opportunity for the business community in Texas to take a lead and partner with the advocates and really show the economic impact. But I think what I have learned through the process, especially with the work of this task force, is that there is not a silver bullet. This is an incredibly complex, multi-layered. If I think about, we have just under 60,000 restaurants across Texas. So think about those freestanding buildings in every corner of the state. So we're, I guess, maybe the best industry to consider from a rural landscape to suburban to places where there is no childcare at all. And so I think what I love is that these priorities are going to show the momentum and movement that we need, but this is going to be a multi-session effort. And if you think about, if I apply it to our own industry, so many of our businesses don't exceed or don't expand because they don't have the business skill set as a new owner. And so that pilot program in Tarrant County is such, I think, to me, a great example, because it's helping give the tools to these, especially home daycare, and helping expand those, but also creating one set of regulations. I think that's critically important. If you're going to expand, and each corner you expand to, the regulations are different, the different fire code, different health code. That's really complex when you're trying to take care of children. And so I think for me, looking at these priorities, it's humbling and it's exciting to see that I truly believe we will make progress, which will create the momentum that we need to keep this going. So we have this infrastructure to support the growth of this, this state. We're 30,000, Kelsey, jobs short right now across our state of 1.4 million. And I could bet a majority of those, if you look at the survey data, are simply because they have nowhere to put their children, especially nights and weekends. So just reminding everyone that there is no, we've got it, it's done, off we go. This is a multi-year, incredibly complex situation that this task force is handling.
I think that's right. And knowing it's a multi-year effort, we've really thought about how do we shore up our existing providers? And to Wendy's point, help them fill existing space and keep existing teachers and add teachers, and maybe they can add a second location, right? But it's sort of like knowing the scope of the problem and how behind we are, we need to kind of prioritize shoring up and strengthening the providers that are already in this space. And I think a lot of our priorities do that. And then that in turn makes it better for them to expand and encourages new people to come in. So it's a multifaceted, multi-year effort for sure. Any other questions? Charles, Megan, anything to add to that while we see if we get more questions coming in?
I was just going to say one of the other things that it is helpful to expanding that supply is when we've talked to some employers about who have been interested in getting more involved and maybe directly offering childcare for their employees. One of the barriers that we do hear that comes up time and time again is that high cost of the liability insurance. And so taking a look at what are the ways that we can optimize the regulatory environment to bring down that liability cost, even if it does raise the compliance cost on the regulation size a little bit, if it nets out to be better, that can make sense there. And then reducing some of those duplicative or even conflicting regulatory environments can help. And I'll give you an example here. We were out in Odessa recently, and there's a YMCA there who offers a pre-K program. And they also offer then daycare. And it is the same children who in the morning are in pre-K are then in the afternoon in daycare. And they physically had to move kids from one classroom to another because the regulations governing the rooms were actively inconsistent with each other. And that is a barrier that something like that particular entity was able to overcome because they are well resourced, but is not the sort of thing that a lot of businesses can overcome or would be frustrated by. And so getting through and ironing out and making sure that our regulations are consistent and are not creating barriers to existing facilities expanding their operations to offer different kinds of care at different times of the day for the same kids, especially, can really help expand the availability of that care.
And I would just like to echo the points that Charles just made and that Emily just made. I think this is definitely, it's not just a one bill approach, and it's an economic development issue. And so to Charles' point about having, removing barriers as far as regulations go, a lot of times large employers will find solutions, internally to address this, but it does have to work out as far as a business and compliance decision. So where the businesses vary in hours of operations and size and location across the state, places in Texas sometimes seem like different countries at times. So it's not just a one bill approach. And I appreciate having this conversation be really led by the employer perspective to really highlight the workforce and economic development issue that this is, and solutions that we can advocate for to help get us into a to more availability for quality care.
Well said, Megan. All right, last call. Any other questions? If not, we will follow up via email with the recording and the link to the full one pager. I love what Megan said to kind of, wrap us up. At the end of the day, this is a major challenge for our workforce. We have business members representing every industry, every part of the state of Texas. And it's because they know that their ability to grow and thrive and really keep this Texas miracle alive is wholly dependent on finding and keeping great employees. And we cannot do that if people cannot afford to work because they cannot find safe, quality, affordable childcare. So that's really why we're here. We're excited to bring these proposals to the Texas Legislature. Many are no cost. Many can be done very quickly. We think it's very much a bipartisan issue. And we are excited to really launch this next stage of our work, which is really the direct advocacy, going to our legislators and telling them about the problems and the solutions. So with that, I think we'll sign off a couple minutes early, and just thank you, Kyle, for being here. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. We're grateful for you being a part of this work. Thank you.